Hello, welcome to another episode of the Fundamentals of Programming from Programmer City. My name is Destiny Brotubo, and on today's episode, we're going to be discussing a variable declaration statements. Don't forget, when we say statements, we already saw statements in the previous tutorials. We've seen a statement as a single unit of execution, okay? So when we say programming as simply set of instructions, that computer programs are a set of instructions that executes a specific task. A statement is simply a unit of that execution. Okay, so when we say variable declaration statement, in the last video we saw output statement, which would display a result or print something on the screen for the user to see. But this time around, we're seeing variable declaration statements. Okay, now when we talk about variable declaration statement, first of all, we'll have to understand what a variable is. Okay, so now looking at variables, variables are simply seen as memory location or a storage location that stores data or value that can change during the program execution. That is, when the program is being executed, when instructions are being carried out, a variable is simply that particular storage where data are being stored that can change its data. That is, the data that are stored within the variables can change as the program runs, as the program is being executed. Now, before we see the changing capability of a variable, that is changing the data that are stored within the variables, first of all, let's actually explore more what a memory location looks like. So you can see a variable as a placeholder, or let's say a container where data can be kept. But in this context, we're talking about the computer memory. So within the computer memory, a particular part of the memory that you create to enable data to be stored in order to use those data for execution, or that when I say execution, for the program to carry out, for the computer rather, to carry out some of these instructions, this execution, it simply go to that particular memory where the data are stored to retrieve the data to use them for the various analysis or manipulation that it will use them for. Okay, so that is what a variable is. Like we always say, explaining things in a layman term, let's say in your kitchen you have a container where you keep different things like your salts, your seasoning, let's say container for rice, beans, and what have you, anything you have on your kitchen. Okay, so whenever you want to get any of these things, you simply go to the particular container. Let's take for instance you want to get salt, you simply go to the container where you kept salt and you take salt from there. Okay, so you can see variable as something like that too, because it keeps data inside variables to use them for execution. That means when the program is trying to do some certain execution, some certain instruction, it's simply make reference to those variables, okay, to get the data for execution. In a nutshell, we can simply say variables are used to store information to be referenced and manipulated in the computer program, okay, in a computer program. So just like the explanation or the vivid layman explanation that I just gave now, I said you can use a variable to store data. Now the data will be referenced as the computer program is being executed. Okay, so that is what variables are meant for. Now, going further, there is a clear distinction between what they call a variable name and a variable. Okay, so when we say variable name, sometimes we make some little mistake. We don't really know the difference between a variable name and a variable. Okay, now there are two different things. The variable name, also known as identifier, because sometimes we refer to it as an identifier instead of just a variable name, is the name or label that is given to that certain memory location, which is the variable itself. Okay, so when you give the variable, for you to declare the variable, you have to give it a name. Okay, so that name is what you now use to reference the variable whenever you want to get the data that are stored in the variable. Okay, now talking about the layman term again, using the kitchen scenario for instance, let's say the kind of container that you stored your salt and your seasoning are the same kind of container, then you now kind of use a label to label them so that you know the difference. Okay, let's take for instance salt and sugar for instance. Apart from the fact that both of them look alike. Okay, now sometimes if you're not very careful, you might want to make sure that you don't mistake sugar for salt. So because of that, you simply put something like a label in the container so that whenever you want to make use of it, you simply check the label, and the particular one that has label that has salt written on it, you just know that okay, that is salt, without bothering about looking into what is actually the content. Okay, but sometimes if you are not very very careful, you're going to use salt instead of sugar, or use sugar instead of salt. But with those label on the container, you can be able to differentiate them. Okay, so you can see a variable name as such, like an identifier or a label that is given to a certain memory. Okay, that means anything you store within the memory, for you to get that thing back within your program to do some analysis or to use them for certain computation, you simply call the variable name. Okay, so that is just it. Let's see some illustrations. Okay, okay, like this is just a statement in QBasic language. Okay, starting from QBasic language. Okay, so now when we say variable declaration statements, okay, this is what it looks like in QBasic. Now we're also going to see a variable declaration statement in Java. At the same time, we'll see how it is done in Python, though there is no variable declaration statement in Python, but we're going to see how variables are handled within a Python programming language. Okay, so starting with QBasic, if I want to declare a variable, I simply use the keyword dim, which simply means dimension. Okay, now this is one of the reasons why I said in some of the previous video that QBasic is one of the language that I love when it comes to teaching programming. Okay, now in QBasic everything will be explicitly spelled out for you. Okay, now when we talk about variable declaration is not really all about just maybe create the memory and keep it there or keep data into it. Okay, variable declaration also involve specifying the kind of data that can be stored within a variable. Okay, that means when you create the variable, that which is the memory location, you also specify the type of data that can be stored in it. At the same time, the type of data you specified will also determine the space, or let's say the storage capacity of that particular variable. So in QBasic simply use the dim word, which is a word that represents dimension. That means you're trying to create a particular memory space with a certain dimension. Okay, that is what the dim mean. Now when you create the dim, when you create the variable, rather in this case, like what you're seeing now, the a is the variable name, that is the identifier. Okay, so automatically what happens is that, if assuming this is the computer memory for instance, okay, now what the computer will do, that the instruction given to the computer here is that the computer, let's say this is the person giving the instruction, tell the computer that okay, if this is your memory, run a particular instruction rather, that will create a particular space on the memory and call the space a. Okay, so that is what this particular statement is doing. Okay, tell the computer, instruct the computer to create a memory in your storage device and call that particular memory you created a. Okay, so that's basically what variable declaration is. it's not just all about calling it a. Also, the a that you created will be used as integer. Okay, the a that you created as it will be used as integer. So in a nutshell, explaining that statement, it simply means create a certain amount of memory and call it a, and the a will be used as integer. Now the integer here right now is something known as a data type. Okay, now in a separate video we're going to be talking about the various data types that we have in programming, and we're going to be looking at a lot of them and what it can store. Okay, but for this video we're just talking about the variable. Okay, so for your information, what we'll just talk about integer here is, now integer is a particular data type that is used to store whole numbers, that is numbers without a decimal points or decimal places. Okay, so what we are trying to say here now is when you instruct the computer, it's basically tell the computer to create a space called a as integer. That means the space you created a will be used to store only integers. So before we proceed with the variable declaration, I'll also just like us to talk about an assignment statement as well. Now, why I want us to talk about assignment statement in this video as well is because now we are talking about variable declaration, and there are only two ways that we can create save data, or two ways that we can actually put data into the variable that is declared. Okay, now we've already seen that when you talk about variable, is simply memory location, and the memory location will be used to store data. Now how do we store data into the particular memory location? Is through either assignment or input. Okay, but for this video we're going to also see assignment, then the next video we're going to be seeing data types. At the same time we'll see input statements. Okay, now talking about assignment, switch back to, sorry,